Alright guys, welcome back to another lesson, lesson 8 at Canton Lounge, and today we're going to talk a little bit about describing things in Cantonese, okay? So just a quick recap on something that we talked about before, which is the translation of to be as in I am, you are, that kind of thing, right? So three main ways to translate it anyway. The first way would be 係, very simply, right? So for example, this means to be someone, to be something. For example, 我係香港人, I'm a Hong Konger, right? Or the second way to translate would be 係. Remember, tones matter here, guys. To be somewhere. For example, Susan 而家喺中國. Susan's in China now. And finally, we have 好. So when you're pairing with an adjective, you have to use 好 before the adjective instead of 係. The most common mistakes that people make when starting out with Cantonese. So for example, we have 隻貓好肥. The cat is fat. Okay. Alright, so a quick recap. So remember, 好 is what you want when you want to use an adjective to describe something, right? Drop the 係 and replace it with 好. So just a couple notes on 好. First of all, a common question that people usually ask would be, so if I put 好 before an adjective, right? Because one of the meanings of 好 is very, right? Does it automatically mean that I automatically say very every single time I say 好adjective? Well, not really. I think that the way to think about it is that it's part of the construct. A really interesting explanation I've heard once for why people add 好 in front of an adjective is for rhythmic balance, if that makes sense. So it does not add the sense of very to what you're expressing. It's just a part of the construct. The second question would be, all right, so if you have an adjective that already has 好 in it, do you or can you still add 好 in front, or should you still add 好in front? Well, the answer is yes, right? And that's simply because no matter how many 好's the adjective has in it, it's still an adjective, and we treat it like any other adjective. Okay. So just two quick notes on 好. Hopefully that clarifies two of the most common questions asked. Okay, so moving on, two ways to use adjectives, right? So you might say something like is smart, he is smart, she is smart, or whatnot. And we would use what we've just talked about, 好 plus adjective, right? So for example, 個小朋友好聰明, the kid is smart, right? Or the other way to use adjectives would be to put it in front of the thing it's trying to describe. So for example, a smart kid, right? So in this case, we have adjective plus 嘅. Remember 嘅, we talked about it being indicating possession, and then plus noun, which kind of makes sense, right? It's a description that belongs to the noun. So for example, we have here 佢哋有一個聰明嘅小朋友. They have a smart kid, right? Okay, so in some cases, when people are speaking Cantonese, it's actually okay to drop the 嘅. So for example, you can say things like 我想買平嘢. I want to buy cheap stuff, inexpensive stuff, right? So when can you tell when it's okay to drop the 嘅and when it's not, or when it doesn't really matter either way? The fact of the matter is that it's one of these things where you really have to consult a native speaker, and there's no rule for it. But the general caveat is, if you're unsure, don't drop the 嘅. Just keep it in there, and you're pretty much good to go. All right, the next thing would be talking about modifiers. So, I mean, it's a little bit boring to say things like it's cheap, it's expensive, it's good, it's bad. You want to say it's fairly good, it's really bad, it's really delicious, and stuff like that, right? So these are modifiers. Well, in Cantonese, it's very simple. All you have to do is to drop the 好 and replace it with a modifier, like fairly, quite, that kind of thing. Right? Oh, by the way, there's actually a list on the corresponding post to this video. I'm going to link it at the bottom so you guys can check that out, right? So, for example, you can have from 我最近好好, which is I'm well recently. to 我最近非常之好. So you drop the 好, the first 好, which is the part of the adjective construct, and you replace it with your modifier. So I've been really good recently. Okay, so what about negative ones? For example, we have, so the construct generally is this, 唔係, and then your modifier, and then your adjective. But just note that it doesn't always fit this pattern. You know, it depends on what modifier you're using. Again, you have to, I'll have to refer you back to the lesson notes for specific examples. For example, you can say 呢隻錶唔貴. So this is like a boring old sentence. You can spruce it up with 呢隻錶唔係好貴㗎咋. So this watch isn't that expensive, right? Okay, so that's to do with adjectives. Now we're going to enter the most important part of this lesson today, relative clauses. So what exactly are relative clauses? Well, in English we have things like object plus relative pronoun plus relative clause. So things like, or without the grammar jargon, thing plus who, words like, you know, who, where, which, that, whom, if you want to be fancy, that kind of thing, and the description. So in English you might say things like, do you remember the day? Okay, object, when, relative pronoun. We were making dumplings from scratch, relative clause. So the relative clause describes the day, right? So in Cantonese, there are two types of relative clauses. There are non-specific ones and there are specific ones. Non-specific ones are ones that have a or an, and specific ones are ones that have the. And we're going to see more examples of that later. So for non-specific ones, the structure is simple. Remember, this is again a bit of a sandwich construct. You have ge in the middle, and you have the relative clause and the thing that describes the end. So simply, you just swap it, right? Unlike in English, the object comes first, the relative clause comes after. The order is switched in Chinese, Cantonese. For example, 我有一隻, so I have a 好憎食吞拿魚嘅貓. Hates tuna, cat, right? So I have a cat who really hates tuna. So as you can see, I have a cat, that would be non-specific. A specific will be the cat, right? So what do we, how do we work with specific relative clauses? It's actually very simple. So instead of ge, you simply replace that with go, and then the classifier that describes the object. So for example, we have here 你可唔可以將你頭先講嗰本書名 send 俾我呢? So 你頭先講 describes the 書名, which is the name of the book. So in English that would be, could you send the you were talking about book name to me? All right, and last but not least, we have a couple of notes on context. So for example, 你啱啱喺餐廳嗰個人啊嘛, something like this, right? So what is exactly does this refer to? 啱啱喺餐廳嗰個人. You know, this can mean a lot of things, right? And you really just have to look at context to decide. For example, it can mean things like the guy who was in the restaurant, the waiter who was in the restaurant, the guy you met in the restaurant, maybe the guy you saw earlier near the restaurant. All of this is possible. So to know exactly what it's talking about, you have to really clue yourself in with context. Do not underestimate the importance of context. Okay. All right, so that's about it for today, guys. As usual, thank you so much for watching. Questions and comments are very welcome. And to download a Cliff Notes version of this lesson, please visit the link below in the description box, as well as a full-length blog post on the subject. Okay, well, that's it from me this time, guys. Thank you, and I will see you next time then, hopefully. All right, take care, guys. Cheers.